Okay, Mary, you are a well-known environmental activist, and I understand that you have won awards and do a lot of work to protect the plight of the curlews. Recently, I read an article that you wrote in The Guardian last year about the forestry sector in Ireland. I believe you live in England. Can you start off with telling us a bit about your connection to Ireland, please?
Yes, my mum actually was born in Enniskillen, and
Oh,
we still have a lot of family over in Ireland, both in the north and the south. So I feel sort of very. So we went there every year for holidays, and I regularly go back to see relatives. So I feel a strong connection to Ireland, and actually got an Irish passport now, so that
oh,
makes me very
cool,
happy.
cool. Oh,
So my connection to Ireland is through family.
okay, that's cool. Yeah, okay, okay. Move on. To talk about the article I mentioned a minute ago, uh, could you tell us what is happening in your opinion with the growth of the forestry sector in Ireland? Like the Irish government plan for the state to plant millions of trees in Ireland over the next 20 years, and on hearing this information, a lot of people may think that this is a good thing. No?
Yes, absolutely. Planting lots of trees is a good thing. I'd like to say that straight away. We need to plant a lot more trees, and Ireland is badly deforested, or has been over the last century. So replanting trees is a very good thing to do. And in this time of climate crisis, trees are a very good way of taking carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and holding it so that it doesn't add to greenhouse gas emissions. So that's a good thing. The problem comes as to when we make decisions about what kind of trees and where to plant them, and whether we're going to harvest them or not. So there's three things that we need to consider: what trees, where, and do we harvest them? So what trees, the ones that are really being planted a lot now in Ireland, are what's called the Sitka spruce, which is a fast-growing softwood tree, pine tree, from Northern Europe, Norway. And that grows very fast, and it can be planted very close together, and it forms a really good cash crop. So the word forestry and cash crop can kind of be interchanged when you're talking about Sitka spruce. So those trees are planted, and 30 years later you can chop them down and get a good return on the wood. The thing is, as soon as they do take carbon out of the atmosphere when they're growing, and then as soon as you chop them down, all that's released and burnt. A lot of carbon dioxide released in the ground when it's trampled by and disturbed by all the machinery. And so as a carbon technique or a tool, it's not an efficient one. So that's the problem with Sitka spruce. The other problem with it is that it's densely packed over large areas, and actually supports very, very little native wildlife. So they're kind of dead zones, really, apart from some fungus and lichen and a few things like crossbills that like pine cones. Nothing else really uses it. The other problem is where it's planted, and very often the places chosen are the sort of wet grassland areas, places that people consider wasteland, non-productive land. That's often the word that's used, non-productive, that phrase. And that's the problem, because that's where some of our most declining and precious wildlife, like hen harriers and curlews, that's where they like to nest.
I interviewed Michael Ewing from the Irish Environmental Pillar recently. Do you know Michael, do you?
I certainly know of him. I've never spoken to him, I don't think.
Okay, yeah. Um, okay, we can come back maybe in a minute to talk a bit about more about that, the forestry sector in Ireland. On another related issue, I read an article yesterday by Patrick Barkham where he quotes a lot of people from organisations in the EU that are incensed by the common agricultural policy of the EU in respect of wildlife and biodiversity. Can you tell us a bit more about this?
I haven't read Patrick's comments, so I'm not sure what he's saying. But in the early days of the common agricultural policy, there were large grants given for sweeping changes to the natural environment of Europe. And so people who signed up to that could get payments to basically cut down hedges, plough up wildflowers, get rid of old growth woodland, all that kind of thing, and plant crops, get lots and lots of livestock out there, and boost the amount of agricultural productivity of Europe. And as a technique, that worked. We certainly vastly increased the amount of agricultural products, almost too much. I mean, some of the older people listening will remember the butter mountains and the milk lakes of the 70s and 80s. Those things were hugely damaging to the natural world. So wildflower meadows, which support so many insects, ground nesting birds, a whole diversity of plant life, we've lost over 99% of them, for example. So the Common Agricultural Policy was a way of funding bad environmental decisions. But that was then. Now it's different. Now there's a big drive to reverse that, to use money to put back nature, to enhance the nature of Europe. And so that's really important, that we're seeing this transition away from mass-produced agriculture, more and more intensity, to farming with nature. And I feel hopeful that the Common Agricultural Policy will do more good than harm in the coming decades.
That's brilliant, because I think they're in the process now of agreeing a new Common Agricultural Policy, aren't they?
Yes, indeed.
Yeah, so I think the current Common Agricultural Policy, that's where there's huge problems, but what you're saying is the next one should be a lot better, yeah?
I think there's constant revisions, constant changes, and it's become so obvious to people that what we've been doing has been terrible for the natural world, and therefore terrible for us. And so there is a desire for a big green sweep across Europe, and Europe in the future could do so much good for the natural world, which is why it's so sad that we over here in the UK will be leaving you and not be a part of that. But I feel hopeful that Europe will do good things for nature in the future.
That's great. Just talk another question about forestry in Ireland. I'm going to get in touch with Richard Bruton next week. He's the Minister for the Environment in Ireland, and I want to interview him soon. And he's also a TD, or MP as you call them in England, for the catchment area of Near FM, you know. So hopefully he'll agree with it. Mary, if you were talking to him yourself soon, like I hope to be, what would you tell him that the alternatives are that you believe should happen in Ireland with the forestry sector over the next 20 or more years?
Well, far be it for me, a Brit, to tell the Irish minister, but what I would like to say is that I think it's fantastic that there is a desire for more forestry, but please take environmentalist advice on planting hardwood native trees in the right places so that we don't further erode critically endangered species. There's so many places that we could put these trees, that we could have a green island in many senses of the word, full of trees, full of grasslands, full of wildlife, and still have agriculture. But we have to start making wise, calm, sensible decisions and take advice. And it isn't just about money. I think what I'd like the minister to make the connection with is the growing issue we have with mental health, people being disconnected from nature. And the more we contact people back with the natural world and provide them with a nature-rich world, we'll be doing so much good for the citizens of Ireland as well, and not just animals and plants. So on every level, to make good decisions about forestry in the future is good. The problem with Sitka spruce is it forms this great green, dense block of trees, which isn't accessible by people. It's hard to walk through. It's sort of devoid of so much of life. It's not the life-enhancing forests of the open hardwood trees which would have been so common throughout Ireland in the past.